Blood under my fingernails. Cold stone pressed hard against my cheek. That was the absolute last thing I remembered before waking up to the cloying scent of my stepmother's cheap lavender perfume. I had died screaming in the basement of the Croft estate, my husband watching from the stairs with empty, dead eyes. Now, my lungs were drawing in clean air. Downstairs, the devil himself was sitting in our parlor, waiting to claim my hand. And this time, I was going to hand him over to my sweet, innocent sister wrapped in a shiny little bow. Cold sweat glued my cotton nightgown to my spine. I bolted upright, tearing the blankets off my chest as I gasped for air that didn't taste like damp earth and iron. My hands flew to my throat. No bruises, no heavy iron collar, just bare, unblemished skin and a pulse hammering so hard it made my teeth ache. Sunlight poured through the thin curtains of my childhood bedroom. The faded floral wallpaper, the scuffed oak dresser, the cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. It was all exactly as it had been 6 years ago. I threw my legs over the edge of the mattress. My feet hit the worn floorboards, and the sheer normality of the sensation sent a violent shudder through me. I stumbled toward the mirror. An 18-year-old girl stared back. Her cheeks were flush with youth, her eyes wide and terrified. The hollowed-out, starved woman who had clawed her own fingers bloody against a reinforced steel door was gone. Today was the 4th of October. My stomach plummeted. Bile rose in the back of my throat. I didn't need a calendar to confirm the date. The oppressive, suffocating scent of roasted lamb and heavy floor wax wafting from downstairs told me everything. My stepmother Diane only ever used that wax when we had guests of severe importance. Desmond Croft was coming to dinner. A ragged laugh tore out of my mouth. It sounded insane, grating against the quiet walls of my room. 6 years of psychological torture, 6 years of learning that the impossibly wealthy, reclusive Desmond Croft was not a tragic romantic figure, but a clinical sadist who liked his wives entirely isolated and entirely broken. I had married him to save my father from bankruptcy. I had played the dutiful martyr, and I had died in the dark, forgotten by everyone. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Light, bouncing, eager footsteps. The door handle clicked. I immediately dropped my head, letting my hair fall over my face, forcing my breathing to slow. Gemma slipped into the room. My stepsister. She looked like a porcelain doll, dressed in a soft pink dress that highlighted her pale skin and large, sympathetic brown eyes. In my first life, I thought Gemma was an angel. She had held my hands and cried when my father announced my engagement to Desmond. She had promised to write me every single day. She never wrote once. Chloe. Gemma's voice was sickeningly sweet, laced with a practiced pity. Are you awake? Mother says you need to start getting ready. Mr. Croft will be here in an hour. I kept my back to her, gripping the edge of the dresser until my knuckles turned white. I needed a moment, just one moment to suppress the violent urge to grab her by her perfectly curled hair and drag her out the window. I'm awake, I muttered, pitching my voice low, aiming for fearful. It wasn't hard. The residual terror of my past life was still vibrating in my bones. Gemma stepped closer, her hand coming to rest lightly on my shoulder. I forced myself not to flinch. You look so pale. Are you scared? I turned to look at her. I let my eyes well up with genuine tears, tears born of rage, not sorrow. He's practically a stranger, Gemma. And the rumors, you've heard what they say about the Croft estate. They say his last fiancée vanished. They say he's cruel. Gemma's lips pressed together in a thin, tight line. A flash of something cold and calculating passed behind her soft brown eyes. In my first life, I had been too blind to see it. I thought she was worried for me. Now, seeing the way her gaze flicked to my worn, hand-me-down dress, and then to the mirror, I recognized the ugly, twisting shape of envy. Gemma didn't care about the rumors of cruelty. She only cared about the rumors of wealth. Desmond Croft possessed a fortune that made our struggling family look like beggars in the dirt. He owned shipping lanes, city blocks, and estates that stretched across counties. "People talk, Chloe," Gemma said, smoothly, squeezing my shoulder. "Mother says it's just jealousy. Wealthy men always have enemies trying to ruin their reputations. Honestly, you should be grateful. Father says the dowry Mr. Croft is offering will pay off all our debts. You'll be wearing diamonds to breakfast." There it was, the greed slipping through the cracks of her sweet facade. I let out a weak, pathetic sob, covering my face with my hands. "I don't care about diamonds. I don't want to go, Gemma. I'd rather live in poverty than marry a man with eyes like his. He terrifies me." I peeked through my fingers, watching her reaction. "You're so lucky. You get to stay here. You get to find someone who actually loves you." I wish it wasn't me. Gemma's posture stiffened. She looked down at me, and the pity in her expression hardened into a sharp, hungry ambition. She patted my head, a patronizing gesture that made my skin crawl. "We all have to make sacrifices for the family, Chloe," she whispered. But her eyes were fixed on the reflection in the mirror, scrutinizing her own flawless makeup, her pretty pink dress. "Don't worry. I'll go downstairs and help Mother prepare the drawing room. Just try to look presentable." She left the room, pulling the door shut behind her. I lowered my hands. The tears vanished instantly, replaced by a dry, hollow ache in my chest. Gemma wanted the Croft fortune. She thought my fear was just the weakness of a coward. She genuinely believed that if she were the one sitting across from Desmond Croft, she could tame him. She thought her White Lotus routine, her breathless innocence, would wrap a monster around her little finger. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the plainest, most shapeless gray dress I owned. If my sweet sister wanted the devil's attention, I was going to do everything in my power to help her get it. Footsteps hammered against the ceiling above me as I waited at the bottom of the stairs, smoothing the rough fabric of my gray dress. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked off the seconds. 7:05. He was here. Voices bled from the drawing room. My father's loud, nervous laughter. My stepmother's high-pitched, fawning chatter. And then, cutting through the pathetic noise of my family groveling, came a voice that froze the blood in my veins. The roads were clear. "We shouldn't waste time with pleasantries, Robert. You know why I'm here. Desmond Croft." His voice was a low, resonant baritone, smooth as glass, and entirely devoid of warmth. I pressed my back against the wall, squeezing my eyes shut. Phantom pains shot through my wrists. I could smell the damp concrete of his basement. I could hear the heavy thud of his boots descending those stairs. Panic clawed at my throat, threatening to choke me. "Breathe," I ordered myself. "You are not down there. You are 18. You know his game." I pushed myself off the wall and stepped into the doorway of the drawing room. The fire in the hearth was roaring, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. My father, Robert, was sweating through his suit, hovering near the liquor cabinet. Diane, sat perched on the edge of the sofa, smiling so hard her face looked paralyzed. And sitting in the high-backed armchair by the window was Desmond. He was undeniably beautiful. That was the trap. Tall, broad-shouldered, tailored in a dark three-piece suit that cost more than our entire house. His dark hair was immaculately styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass. But his eyes, pale, icy blue, were dead. They scanned the room with the clinical detachment of an entomologist studying insects pinned to a board. "Ah, Chloe," my father barked, his voice cracking slightly as he saw me. "Come in, girl. Don't loiter in the doorway." Desmond's pale eyes snapped to me. The weight of his stare was physical, heavy, and suffocating. I immediately slumped my shoulders, ducking my head. I let my hands tremble, visibly, as I stepped forward. I didn't need to act much. My hands were actually shaking. I just didn't bother trying to hide it. "Good evening, Mr. Croft." I mumbled, my voice barely a whisper. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the tips of his polished Italian leather shoes. Silence stretched. Desmond didn't reply right away. I could feel him analyzing me. In my past life, I had tried to be brave. I had stood tall, met his eyes, and spoken clearly, trying to prove I was worthy of the marriage. He had liked that. He liked a spine he could break. "She's a bit shy," Diane rushed to say, letting out a nervous titter. "But she's a good girl, very obedient, very quiet." "I can see that," Desmond finally said. His tone was flat bored. He shifted in his chair, and the slight sound of his cufflink tapping the armrest signaled his fading interest. "Sit down, Chloe." I scurried over to the furthest chair in the corner, folding myself inward, trying to look as unappealing and pathetic as possible. Desmond watched me for another fraction of a second before turning his attention back to his glass of scotch. Right on cue, the drawing room doors swung open again. "Mother, the tea is ready." "Oh." Gemma stopped perfectly in the threshold, acting startled. She was carrying a silver tray with our best china. The pink dress swayed as she breathed. Her cheeks flushed, her lips parted in surprise. She looked like a painting of domestic innocence. Desmond's gaze flicked to her. This time, it didn't immediately move away. "I'm so sorry," Gemma said softly, stepping into the room with practiced grace. "I didn't realize we had already begun. Let me pour the tea." She glided across the room. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at our parents. Her entire focus was on Desmond. She knelt slightly as she placed the tray on the low table in front of him, ensuring the neckline of her dress dipped just enough to be noticeable, but not enough to be crass. "Mr. Croft," she murmured, lifting the teapot, "it's an honor to finally meet you. I'm Gemma, Chloe's sister." Desmond leaned forward slightly. The dead ice in his eyes shifted, catching the firelight. He watched Gemma's steady, delicate hands pour the tea. He watched the confident, sweet smile she aimed at him. She was projecting warmth, purity, and an utter lack of fear. "Gemma," he repeated. The way he said her name made my stomach turn. It was the tone a butcher used when inspecting a prime cut of meat. "You aren't afraid of me, Gemma." My father choked on his scotch. Diane turned pale. It was a blatant, dangerous question. Gemma, however, simply smiled wider. She offered him the teacup, her fingers lightly brushing his. "Why would I be afraid of a guest in our home? People spread nasty rumors about successful men, Mr. Croft. I prefer to judge a person by how they treat me." It was a brilliant performance, truly. If I didn't know she had spent the last hour pricing out the diamond watch on his wrist, I would have believed she was a saint. Desmond took the cup. His fingers lingered near hers. A slow, terrifying smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. Is that so? Yes, Gemma breathed, holding his gaze. She was challenging him, thinking she was reeling in a wealthy patron. She had no idea she was dangling herself over a shark tank. I sat in my corner, completely ignored, watching the exact moment my fate changed hands. Desmond's eyes darkened. He liked her confidence. He liked her blinding, naive arrogance. He looked at Gemma and saw a bright, shining light that he wanted to snuff out. Robert, Desmond said softly, never breaking eye contact with Gemma. We need to discuss the terms of this arrangement. My father practically vibrated with anxiety. Of course, Mr. Croft. Whatever you need. I was under the impression I was here for your eldest daughter. Desmond continued, smoothly taking a slow sip of his tea. But it seems I may have been misinformed about which of your girls would make a more suitable companion for my estate. The room went dead silent. Diane's jaw dropped. Gemma's face bloomed into a triumphant, radiant flush, though she dipped her head to feign modesty. I kept my head down, burying my face in my hands, as if I were crying from the shame of rejection. But behind my fingers, my lips stretched into a wide, jagged smile. Take her. I thought, my heart hammering a vicious, victorious rhythm against my ribs. Take her, lock the door, and throw away the key. My father's jaw practically unhinged. He stammered, his bloodshot eyes darting frantically between Desmond's impassive face, my hunched form in the corner, in Gemma's radiant, victorious smile. Robert was a coward, but he wasn't entirely stupid. He knew a sudden change in terms with a man like Desmond Croft could result in financial ruin or worse. Mr. Croft. My father started, his voice a gravelly wheeze. The original contract, the debts, they were explicitly tied to Chloe's dowry. I assure you, she is perfectly healthy and capable of— I am not interested in your assurances, Robert, Desmond interrupted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet, absolute authority in his tone sucked all the oxygen out of the room. I am interested in Gemma. The financial arrangements will remain identical. Your debts will be cleared by tomorrow morning. My lawyers will draft the revised addendum tonight. Diane let out a noise that sounded like a strangled pigeon. She clutched the fabric of her skirt, her knuckles white. Her face split into a grin so wide it looked painful. Gemma was her biological daughter. I was merely the baggage left over from my father's first marriage. For years, Diane had resented that my age placed me first in line for a wealthy suitor. Now, the ultimate prize was being handed directly to her own blood. Oh, Mr. Croft, that is exceedingly generous, Diane gushed, practically climbing over the coffee table in her excitement. Gemma is a wonderful girl, cultured, refined. She will make a magnificent mistress of the Croft estate. Desmond finally stood. He towered over my father, casting a long dark shadow across the Persian rug. He buttoned his suit jacket, his pale eyes flicking down to Gemma, who remained perfectly composed, staring up at him through her thick lashes. We will have a brief engagement, Desmond announced. It wasn't a request. 3 weeks. I abhor long, drawn-out spectacles. Diane, you will oversee the preparations. Send the bills to my office. He turned on his heel and walked toward the drawing room doors. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even look at me. I was completely, utterly dismissed. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, and the moment the latch caught, The room erupted. Diane shrieked with joy, grabbing Gemma by the shoulders and pulling her into a tight, frantic hug. My father slumped into his armchair, burying his face in his hands, letting out a long, shuddering breath of pure relief. His debts were gone. His kneecaps were safe. He didn't care which daughter he had sold to secure his survival. I stayed in my corner, slowly, uncurling my fingers. My palms were damp with sweat. I had done it. I had actually done it. The invisible chain that had dragged me down into the dark basement of the Croft estate was broken. Gemma pulled away from her mother and turned to me. The sweet, innocent facade she had worn for Desmond melted away, leaving behind a sharp, triumphant sneer. She crossed the room, her pink dress swishing softly against the floorboards. "Sigh, Chloe," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I am so sorry. I had no idea he would change his mind like that. You must be absolutely devastated." I stood up, keeping my eyes cast downward, playing the role of the humiliated, rejected older sister. "It's fine, Gemma. Really. You heard him. He prefers you." She laughed. It was a bright, chiming sound that grated against my eardrums. "Well, men like Desmond Croft appreciate a woman with a bit of spark. You were sitting there like a frightened mouse. You can't expect a billionaire to want a wife who flinches when he enters a room." I forced a solitary tear to spill over my lower lash line. I wiped it away quickly, sniffing. "You're right. I'm not brave like you. I hope you'll be happy." "Oh, I will be," Gemma whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear. Her breath smelled faintly of peppermint. "I'll be wearing diamonds to breakfast, Chloe, just like Mother said, and you'll still be wearing that pathetic gray dress." She turned her back on me and linked her arm through Diane's, chattering excitedly about floral arrangements and guest lists. I walked out of the drawing room and climbed the stairs back to my bedroom. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood. A genuine, unrestrained laugh finally broke from my chest. It started small, a tremor in my throat, and quickly grew into a full-body release of pure, unadulterated relief. Gemma thought she had won a fairy tale. She thought she had stolen a crown. She didn't know that Desmond didn't want a partner with a spark. He wanted a fire he could stomp out. He had looked at Gemma's arrogance and seen a challenge. In my previous life, he broke me because I was a duty, a boring obligation he resented. This time, he was going to break Gemma for sport. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched the trap snap shut with clinical fascination. Desmond began the isolation process, exactly as he had with me, though Gemma was too blinded by the luxury to recognize it. It started with the gifts. A cascade of velvet boxes arrived at our house daily. But they weren't just gifts. They were chains. A massive emerald ring that was so heavy, Gemma complained her finger ached by noon. A custom-fitted corset from Paris that laced so tightly she could barely take a full breath, accompanied by a note from Desmond stating he expected her to maintain a perfect silhouette. A diamond choker that clasped tight around her throat, requiring a tiny silver key to remove. "Look at this, Chloe," Gemma boasted one afternoon, adjusting the heavy diamond collar in the hallway mirror. She tilted her chin up, admiring the brutal sparkle. "He had it custom-made. It's an antique setting, pure platinum. It looks very heavy," I noted quietly, leaning against the doorframe. Gemma rolled her eyes. "Beauty is heavy. You wouldn't understand. Desmond says he wants the world to know I belong to him. Belong to him. The exact words he had whispered into my ear right before he locked the reinforced steel door of the basement. I felt a cold, phantom chill run down my spine, but I kept my face perfectly blank. "Well," I said softly, "it certainly suits you." 3 weeks evaporated in a haze of tulle silk and frantic screaming from Diane. The house was unrecognizable, buried under an avalanche of white lilies and ivory ribbons. I spent the time quietly packing my life into 2 worn leather suitcases. My father had paid his debts. My presence was no longer required. The moment Gemma drove away in the Croft limousine, I was leaving for the city to find a job, a small apartment, and a life entirely my own. The morning of the wedding was gray and overcast. Heavy rain lashed against the windows, a grim, pathetic fallacy that made me smile into my coffee cup. Upstairs, the bridal suite was a war zone. 2 makeup artists, a hairdresser, and 3 seamstresses hovered around Gemma like anxious bees. Desmond had fired the dressmaker Diane hired and sent his own. The gown he demanded Gemma wear was a monstrosity of heavy white satin embroidered with thousands of seed pearls. It weighed nearly 40 pounds. It had a high, stiff lace collar that dug into Gemma's jawline and sleeves that buttoned tightly from the wrist all the way past her elbows. It wasn't a dress. It was a straitjacket disguised as haute couture. "It's too tight," Gemma snapped, slapping a seamstress's hand away. Her face was flushed, her perfect porcelain skin marred by a sheen of irritated sweat. "I can't lift my arms past my waist." "Fix it." The head seamstress, a stern woman on Desmond's payroll, didn't flinch. "Mr. Croft's exact instructions, miss. The silhouette must remain perfectly rigid. He requested absolute perfection." Gemma's jaw tightened. For a brief second, a flicker of genuine annoyance and perhaps a tiny spark of unease crossed her face. But then she looked in the floor-to-length mirror. She saw the glittering pearls, the endless train, the sheer, oppressive wealth radiating off the fabric. The unease vanished, swallowed whole by her ego. "Fine," Gemma huffed. "Just make sure the veil is pinned securely. I won't have it slipping." I stood by the door, holding a velvet cushion, bearing her diamond choker. I watched her suffer for her vanity. In my previous life, my dress had been simple, cheap. Desmond hadn't cared enough to dress me up before he tore me down. But Gemma, he was taking his time. He was enjoying the process of restricting her movements, suffocating her slowly under the guise of lavish attention. The ceremony took place at the Grand Cathedral in the center of the city. The pews were packed with the city's elite, all desperate to catch a glimpse of the reclusive billionaire and his new prize. I sat in the 3rd row, dressed in a simple navy blue suit, entirely invisible. The organ music swelled. The heavy wooden doors opened. Gemma walked down the aisle. She looked like a ghost, weighed down by the heavy satin, her face pale under the thick veil. She walked slowly, not out of grace, but because the dress physically prevented her from taking a normal stride. She was exhausted before she even reached the altar. Standing at the end of the aisle was Desmond. He wore a severe black tailcoat. He didn't smile as Gemma approached. His pale blue eyes tracked her slow, strained progress with a terrifying intensity. When my father finally handed her over, Desmond took Gemma's hand. I saw her flinch slightly as his fingers closed over hers. His grip was a vice. The bishop droned on. The vows were exchanged. Gemma's voice wavered slightly when she promised to obey. Desmond's voice was as cold and sharp as a scalpel. "I do." He lifted her veil. He didn't kiss her lips. He leaned down and pressed his mouth to her cheek, right over the edge of the stiff lace collar. I couldn't hear what he whispered to her, but I saw the immediate violent shudder that racked Gemma's body. Her eyes went wide, darting to the congregation, suddenly looking very small and very young. The deed was done. The papers were signed. The reception was held at a lavish hotel downtown, but Desmond cut it short. He claimed he wanted his bride all to himself. When they descended the grand staircase to leave, the crowd cheered. Rice was thrown. Flashbulbs popped. I stood by the coat check, my 2 leather suitcases resting by my feet. Gemma passed by me, guided heavily by Desmond's hand, gripping the small of her back. The corset and the dress had taken their toll. She looked entirely drained, the arrogant spark in her eyes, replaced by a dull, confused exhaustion. She caught my eye as they walked past. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. She looked at me, standing freely by the door, with my luggage unbound by diamonds or satin. A flash of something raw and deeply panicked flared in her brown eyes. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, as if the reality of walking out that door with a man she didn't know was finally hitting her. But Desmond's hand tightened on her back. He propelled her forward, out into the cold rain, toward the waiting black limousine. "Goodbye, Gemma," I murmured to the empty air. I grabbed the handles of my suitcases and walked out the side door, stepping into the damp, freezing city street. The cold air hit my face, and I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with freedom. I didn't know exactly what Desmond had planned for her. I didn't know if he would use the basement or the attic or the soundproofed study in the East Wing. But I knew the monster he was, and as I hailed a cab to take me to the train station, completely severing my ties to my toxic family, a dark, vicious smile stretched across my face. Gemma wanted the Croft fortune. She wanted the ring, the title, the power. Now she was going to pay the bill. My new apartment was a cramped, drafty box above a noisy bakery in the financial district. The radiators clanged loud enough to wake the dead. The hot water lasted exactly 4 minutes, and the window looking out over the alleyway let in the constant, dull roar of city traffic. It was the most beautiful place I had ever lived. For the first 6 months, I woke up every morning at dawn, waiting for the heavy thud of Desmond's boots on the stairs. I would lie frozen on my cheap, lumpy mattress, my lungs seizing in a phantom panic. It took a long time to train my brain to accept the silence. I learned to ground myself in the smell of yeast and burnt sugar drifting up from the bakery below. I traced the water stains on the ceiling until my heart rate leveled out. I was alive. I was alone. I was safe. I found a job working behind the counter at a high-end florist downtown. It paid just enough to cover rent and groceries. I spent my days stripping thorns off roses, sweeping up dead leaves, and ringing up frantic businessmen, buying apologies for their wives. It was menial, exhausting work. I cherished every single second of it. No one watched me. No one evaluated my posture. No one locked the door when I tried to leave at 5 o'clock. Of course, I didn't completely ignore my past. I kept a close eye on the society columns in the Sunday papers. It was a morbid compulsion, a need to verify that the nightmare was truly happening to someone else. At first, the papers were saturated with Gemma, the new mistress of Croft Manor. The headlines crowed. There were glossy staged photos of her attending luncheons, wearing outfits that cost more than my father's entire house. She looked triumphant. She looked radiant, but by the 4th month, the photos stopped. The society pages reported that Mrs. Croft was simply enjoying the privacy of the estate or focusing on philanthropic efforts from home. The public appearances dried up entirely. My stepmother Diane occasionally gave glowing defensive quotes to desperate journalists, insisting that the newlyweds were just deeply in love and preferred isolation. I knew exactly what that isolation looked like. It looked like heavy oak doors without handles on the inside. It looked like thick velvet curtains drawn tight across the windows, blocking out the sun. It looked like sitting perfectly still in a straight-back chair for 5 hours because Desmond decided your breathing was too loud and needed to be disciplined. The reality of Gemma's situation didn't fully materialize until late November. The florist I worked for was contracted to provide the centerpieces for the annual Winter Solstice Gala, a massive charity event hosted by the city's wealthiest families. Desmond Croft was on the board of directors. My boss offered double pay for anyone willing to stay late and work the coat check and floral maintenance during the event. I needed the money for winter boots. I took the shift. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was suffocatingly warm, smelling of expensive perfume and decaying orchids. I stood in the back hallway, wearing a standard black uniform, organizing a cart of replacement boutonnieres. A sudden hush fell over the chaotic chatter of the main hall. The music seemed to dip. I peeked through the swinging doors. Desmond Croft was making his entrance. He looked exactly the same. Immaculate black tuxedo, sharp jaw, pale eyes, radiating a chilling, absolute authority. The crowd parted around him instinctively, a school of fish, avoiding a predator, and walking half a step behind him was Gemma. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my hand flat against the wood of the door, staring at my sister. She was drowning. Gemma wore a stunning floor-length gown of dark emerald silk. It had long sleeves that ended in tight cuffs and a high, restrictive neckline that swallowed her throat. The heavy platinum and diamond collar was clamped securely over the fabric, gleaming under the chandeliers. But the dress wasn't what made my stomach clench. It was her posture. The arrogant, bouncing white Lotus was dead. Gemma's shoulders were hunched slightly, folded inward as if anticipating a blow. Her porcelain skin was pulled tight over her cheekbones, highlighting a rapid, drastic weight loss. Her eyes, usually so bright and calculating, were wide, vacant, and darting frantically around the room, tracking every movement with the hypervigilance of a hunted animal. As they moved through the crowd, a wealthy socialite reached out, placing a manicured hand on Gemma's arm to greet her. Gemma flinched violently. Her whole body jerked away from the touch, a sharp gasp tearing from her lips. She immediately looked terrified, her eyes snapping to Desmond's face in pure, unadulterated panic. Desmond didn't look at the socialite. He looked down at Gemma. The smile on his face was polite, charming, and utterly terrifying. He reached out and wrapped his large hand around the back of Gemma's neck, his fingers resting casually just above the diamond collar. "My apologies," Desmond told the startled woman, his voice a smooth, venomous purr. "Gemma has been dealing with a touch of nerves lately. The crowds overwhelm her. Isn't that right, darling?" Gemma's chest heaved. I could see the subtle pressure of Desmond's thumb pressing into her skin. "Yes," Gemma whispered. Her voice was thin, reedy, stripped of all its former confidence. "I'm just very overwhelmed." Desmond patted her neck, a gesture of ownership that made my own skin crawl with phantom memories. "We'll be taking our leave shortly." She needs her rest. He guided her away, his hand never leaving her neck. Gemma walked stiffly, staring straight ahead, completely broken to the bridle. I let the swinging door fall shut, stepping back into the dim quiet of the service hallway. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my thighs, forcing myself to take a deep, stabilizing breath. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. It had crushed her bones to dust. I retreated to the employee restrooms an hour later, needing to splash cold water on my face. The oppressive atmosphere of the gala was dredging up memories I had spent 6 months burying. The phantom feeling of cold iron against my wrists kept returning, making my fingers twitch. The women's lounge was a sprawling, opulent room with marble sinks, gold fixtures, and an attendant who handed out warm towels. I bypassed the main area, slipping into the farthest stall and locking the door. I leaned my forehead against the cool, painted metal, closing my eyes and counting backward from 10. I am not in the estate. I am Chloe. I am free. The heavy mahogany door of the lounge pushed open, click-clack of expensive heels against the marble. Then, a harsh, jagged sound. Someone was hyperventilating. I opened my eyes, staying perfectly still. "Ma'am, are you all right? Can I get you some water?" The attendant asked, her voice laced with polite concern. "Get out!" The reply was a desperate, ragged hiss. "Get out! Get out! Leave me alone!" The attendant didn't argue. Wealthy women having breakdowns in the bathroom wasn't a rare occurrence at these galas. The heavy door opened and closed again. The room was silent, save for the frantic, shallow gasps echoing off the marble. I recognized that sound. It was the sound of a panic attack, brought on by the sudden crushing realization that you are entirely trapped. I unlatched my stall door and stepped out. Gemma was gripping the edge of the nearest marble sink. Her knuckles were bone white. She had torn off the emerald silk gloves she had been wearing earlier, and her bare forearms were exposed. I stopped dead in my tracks. Faded yellow and purple bruises bloomed in the shape of large fingerprints across her pale skin. She was staring into the gold-rimmed mirror, but she wasn't looking at her reflection. She was staring through it, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her hollowed cheeks, ruining her pristine makeup. "Gemma." I didn't mean to speak. The name just fell out of my mouth. She whipped around, pressing her back against the sink. Her eyes were feral-wide, with a terror that belonged in a slaughterhouse, not a luxury hotel. When she realized it was me standing there in my cheap black catering uniform, a dozen different emotions warred across her face. Shock, humiliation, and then a desperate, pathetic flare of hope. "Chloe," she gasped, stumbling forward. Her heavy dress dragged across the tiles. "Chloe, you're here. You're actually here." She reached out, grabbing my wrists. Her hands were freezing. The emerald ring on her finger dug painfully into my skin. "You have to help me," she sobbed, the words spilling out of her in a chaotic rush. Her polished facade was completely shattered. "You have to tell Mother. You have to call the police. He locks me in the basement, Chloe. It's soundproof. He leaves me down there in the dark for days if I speak out of turn, if I don't eat exactly what he tells me to eat." She was shaking violently, her grip on my wrists tightening until it bruised. "He makes me wear this," she cried, clawing frantically at the heavy diamond collar around her throat. "He has the only key. It's too tight. I can't swallow. I can't breathe properly. Please, Chloe, you have to get me out of there." He's a monster. He's going to kill me. I stood perfectly still. I looked down at her hands, bruising my wrists. I looked at the sunken, terrified face of the sister who had happily pushed me into the fire so she could steal my crown. In my past life, when the steel door slammed shut on me for the first time, I had screamed Gemma's name. I had prayed she would notice I was missing. I had prayed my family would come looking for me. They never did. They cashed Desmond's checks and enjoyed their new wealth, while I slowly starved to death in the dark. I smoothly twisted my arms, breaking her grip. Gemma stumbled back, looking at me in shock. "You're wearing diamonds, Gemma," I said quietly. My voice was flat, devoid of any warmth or sympathy, just like you always wanted. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me as if she had never seen me before. "He's destroying me," she whispered, a thin line of spittle forming at the corner of her lips. "I am your sister. You made your choice the day you served him tea," I replied, stepping back. "You judged him by how he treated you. You thought you were smarter than the rumors. You wanted the fortune. This is the cost. Chloe, please." The heavy mahogany door to the lounge swung open with a soft, ominous creak. The temperature in the room instantly plummeted. I didn't need to turn around to know who was standing in the doorway. The sheer, suffocating weight of his presence filled the space, pressing against my eardrums. Gemma's eyes shot past my shoulder. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax corpse. She clapped both hands over her mouth, choking back a sob, shrinking back against the marble counter. "Gemma." Desmond's voice was soft, smooth, clinical. I lowered my head immediately, fixing my gaze on the intricate pattern of the tile floor. I stepped out of the way, making myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. I was just the catering staff. I was nothing. Desmond walked past me. He didn't even glance in my direction. His total focus was locked on his wife. He moved with a terrifying, unhurried grace, stopping inches away from where Gemma cowered. He reached out and gently took her hands, pulling them away from her face. She was trembling so hard, her teeth chattered. "You've been crying, darling," Desmond murmured, his thumb brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The contrast between his gentle tone and the absolute paralyzing fear in Gemma's eyes was sickening. "You know how I feel about public outbursts. It reflects poorly on the estate." "I'm sorry," Gemma whimpered. "I'm so sorry, Desmond. I just felt sick. I just needed a moment." Desmond's eyes flicked to her bare arms, taking in the exposed bruises. His jaw tightened a fraction of an inch. "You took off your gloves." "I was hot," she pleaded, tears spilling over again. "Please, we will discuss your blatant disregard for my instructions when we get home," Desmond said smoothly. He gripped her elbow, his fingers pressing precisely into a nerve that made Gemma gasp in sudden, sharp pain. "Put your gloves back on. We are leaving." He turned her toward the door. Gemma grabbed her gloves from the sink, her hands shaking so badly she could barely pull the silk over her bruised skin. She didn't look at me as Desmond guided her out. She was entirely consumed by the terror of what awaited her at the end of the limousine ride. The heavy door closed, leaving me alone in the sterile, bright silence of the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were clear. The phantom chains around my wrists were gone forever. I turned on the faucet, washed my hands with cheap pink soap, and went back to work. Rain hammered against the plate glass window of the flower shop blurring the city traffic into a smear of gray and dull yellow headlights. It was mid-April, nearly a year since my sister walked down the aisle in 40 pounds of suffocating satin. I stood behind the counter methodically, stripping thorns from a fresh batch of dark red roses. My hands were calloused now. My fingernails were constantly stained with dirt and plant food. I owned 3 decent sweaters and a winter coat that actually kept out the wind. I was the floor manager of the shop. I was happy. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the low hum of the refrigeration units. I didn't look up immediately, tossing a handful of sharp green thorns into the compost bin beneath the register. "Welcome. I'll be right with you. The pre-arranged bouquets are in the cooler to your left if you're in a rush." "I don't want flowers, Chloe." My hands stopped moving. The voice was ragged, thinned out by cigarette smoke and a deep, exhausting anxiety. I slowly wiped my hands on my canvas apron and looked up. Standing in the center of the shop, dripping rainwater onto the clean linoleum floor, was Diane. It took me a few seconds to fully process that it was actually my stepmother. The woman standing before me looked nothing like the fiercely manicured, social climbing matriarch who had practically shoved her own daughter into a monster's bed. Her blonde hair, once perfectly coiffed, hung in limp, graying strands around her face. She wore a cheap plastic raincoat over a faded sweater. The designer handbags and heavy gold jewelry were completely gone. She looked frail, deeply aged, and terrified. "Diane," I said evenly. I didn't move from behind the counter. I didn't offer her a towel. "How did you find me?" "I paid a private investigator," she rasped, stepping closer to the counter. Her hands gripped the edge of the glass display case. Her fingernails were bitten down to the quick. "It took the last of my savings. He tracked your tax records to this place." I picked up my pruning shears and reached for another rose. "You shouldn't have wasted your money. I don't have anything to give you. Your father is in the hospital. Chloe." Diane blurted out, her voice cracking. "He had a massive coronary last Tuesday. He's in a public ward. We don't have the insurance to move him. We don't have anything." I paused, the shears biting halfway through a thick green stem. A year ago, the news might have triggered a fleeting pang of guilt. Now I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical curiosity. What happened to Desmond's generous settlement? He cleared the debts, didn't he? You were supposed to be set for life. Diane let out a bitter, ugly laugh that ended in a wet cough. She leaned heavily against the glass. "He didn't clear them, Chloe. He bought them. He bought the mortgages on the house, the loans your father took out for his business. Everything. He held them quietly for 6 months." I understood immediately. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was a textbook Desmond Croft maneuver. And then he called them in. He called them in all at once. Diane whispered, tears finally spilling over her red-rimmed eyelids. He demanded payment in full within 30 days. When Robert tried to call him, his lawyers sent a cease and desist. When I tried to go to the estate to see Gemma, the security guards threatened to have me arrested for trespassing. They took the house, Chloe. They took the cars. We live in a studio apartment in the garment district. We are ruined. I snapped the rose stem, tossing the flower into the ceramic bucket. Desmond was a predator who preferred his prey entirely isolated. As long as Gemma had wealthy parents and a safety net, she had a theoretical escape route. By bankrupting my father, Desmond had severed Gemma's final tie to the outside world. She belonged to the estate now, permanently. "I'm sorry to hear about Robert's health," I said. My tone was polite, distant, the exact voice I used for difficult customers. But I can't help you. Diane stared at me, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. You're his daughter. Gemma is your sister. You have to go to the estate. You have to talk to him. If he sees you, if you just explain... Explain what, Diane? I interrupted my voice, dropping to a low, hard register. I dropped the shears on the counter. The heavy metal clanged loudly against the wood. Explain that you happily sold your daughter to a sadist for a pile of cash. You knew the rumors. You knew he was dangerous. You didn't care because you wanted the diamonds. You knew, Diane shrieked, her hands slamming against the display glass. You sat in that drawing room and let her take your place. You knew what he was. Yes, I answered, simply looking her dead in the eyes. I knew, and I chose survival. You chose greed. Now you are paying the price. Diane recoiled, as if I had struck her across the face. She looked at me with a mixture of profound horror and deep, venomous hatred. She wanted to scream at me, to tear the shop apart, but the fight had been drained out of her by months of poverty and fear. She backed away from the counter, her wet shoes squeaking against the linoleum. You're just as much of a monster as he is, she spat, turning toward the door. Maybe, I said, picking up the shears again. But I'm a free one. Goodbye, Diane. She pushed out into the rain, the door chiming merrily behind her. I stood there for a long time, listening to the traffic, watching the water run down the glass. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt a profound, heavy silence settle into my bones. The family that had condemned me to death in my past life was finally completely broken. Phones ringing at 3 a.m. never deliver good news. The shrill noise dragged me out of a deep sleep. I fumbled in the dark of my tiny bedroom, knocking a water glass to the floor, before my fingers finally closed over the cheap receiver. I pressed it to my ear, squinting against the street lamp, filtering through the blinds. Hello, am I speaking to Chloe? A woman asked. It was a crisp, professional tone, laced with an urgent edge. Speaking. My name is Dr. Hayes. I'm calling from the intensive care unit at St. Jude's Private Medical Center. You are listed as the primary emergency contact for a Mrs. Gemma Croft. The residual sleep instantly vanished. I sat up, pulling the thin blanket to my chest. The air suddenly felt freezing. St. Jude's was the most exclusive, highly secure hospital in the city. You didn't go there for a standard emergency. You went there when you needed absolute discretion. I haven't spoken to my sister in a year, I said carefully. Her husband is Desmond Croft. He should be your contact. Mr. Croft is currently out of the country on business. Dr. Hayes replied smoothly, a little too smoothly. It was a rehearsed line. And we have been unable to reach your parents. Mrs. Croft has suffered a severe trauma. She is stable, but she requires a family member present for consent on an upcoming surgical procedure. Desmond was out of the country. Of course he was. He had likely dumped her at a facility on his payroll and vanished to establish deniability. I looked at the clock. It was 3:14 a.m. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I didn't dress up. I threw on jeans, work boots, and a heavy sweater, hailing a cab in the freezing drizzle. I rode in silence to the gated entrance of St. Jude's. A silent security guard escorted me up a private elevator to the 4th floor. The ICU wing was deserted, smelling sharply of iodine and expensive lemon bleach. Standing outside room 412 was a man in a perfectly tailored gray suit. He held a leather briefcase and looked at me with the dead, assessing eyes of a corporate shark. "Sork, Chloe," the man said. He didn't offer his hand. "I am Mr. Sterling, legal counsel for the Croft estate. I appreciate you coming." "What happened to her?" I asked. Mr. Sterling adjusted his cuffs. "Mrs. Croft suffered a terrible accident at the estate. She slipped and took a severe fall down the main marble staircase. It resulted in multiple fractures, a punctured lung, and significant lacerations." I stared at him. It was the exact same lie Desmond had used to explain my broken ribs in my past life, right before he locked me in the basement for good. "A fall," I repeated, my voice devoid of inflection. "A tragic accident," the lawyer confirmed without blinking. He pulled a thick stack of papers attached to a clipboard from his briefcase. "Because of the sensitive nature of Mr. Croft's public profile, the hospital requires you to sign these non-disclosure agreements before you see her and before you authorize the orthopedic surgery required for her arm." He held out a heavy silver pen. I took it. I didn't read the papers. I didn't care about the legal threats. I signed my name on the dotted lines and handed the clipboard back. He nodded once, stepping aside. I pushed open the heavy door to room 412. The rhythmic mechanical hiss of a ventilator filled the quiet room. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the walls. Gemma lay in the center of the bed, swallowed by white sheets and a mess of plastic tubes. I walked slowly to the edge of the mattress. She was unrecognizable. The right side of her face was a swollen, purplish-black mass of bruised tissue. Her right arm was elevated, immobilized in a thick cast. A chest tube drained dark fluid into a canister near the floor. But the worst part wasn't the broken bones. It was her neck. The diamond collar was gone. In its place, the skin was raw, heavily bandaged, and marred by deep infected gouges, as if someone had tried to physically rip the metal off her throat. Her good eye fluttered open. The heavy medication made her pupils dilate until they were almost entirely black. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment before her head turned a fraction of an inch. "Chloe." The sound barely registered above the ventilator. It was a wet, destroyed croak. I stood there looking down at the white Lotus, who had thought she could tame a monster, with a pretty smile. She wanted the fortune and the prestige. Now she was broken porcelain, glued back together by NDAs and paid-off doctors. "You fell down the stairs, Gemma," I said, quietly, leaning closer. A single tear leaked out of her eye, tracking a slow path across her bruised cheek. She tried to move her hand, but the restraints on her wrists held her flat against the mattress. "He tried to kill me." She breathed, her chest violently hitching. "He didn't want me anymore. I bored him. He said I didn't fight back right." I closed my eyes. The familiar bile rose in my throat. Desmond didn't just want obedience. He wanted a struggle. He had broken Gemma too quickly, and when the game stopped being fun, he decided to throw away the toy. "Sign the papers, Chloe," she begged, her voice a desperate rattle. "Take me home with you. Please, don't leave me with them. If I go back to the estate, I won't survive the next fall." I looked at her ruined face. I thought about the basement. I thought about the 6 years I spent screaming in the dark while she spent my dowry. I reached out and gently smoothed the edge of the blanket near her shoulder. I signed the surgical consent forms. I told her, my voice perfectly steady, perfectly cold, "You're going to get the best medical care money can buy." Desmond made sure of it. Gemma's eye widened. The monitor beside her bed began to beep faster as panic set in. No, Chloe, you can't. You made your bed, Gemma," I whispered, stepping away from the mattress. Now, you have to lie in it. I hope the diamonds were worth it. I turned my back on her panicked sobbing and walked out. I let the heavy door click shut, sealing her inside with the lawyer and the machines. I walked down the sterile hallway, took the elevator down, and stepped outside. Dawn was breaking over the city skyline, painting the clouds in violent shades of purple. I took a deep breath of cold air and started walking home. Summer hit the city like a physical blow. Heat radiated off the concrete pavement, turning the air above the streets into a shimmering, distorted haze. Inside the flower shop, the air conditioning units fought a losing battle, humming loudly as I arranged a fresh delivery of hydrangeas. It had been 4 months since I walked out of St. Jude's Hospital. 4 months since I left my sister in a cage made of money and non-disclosure agreements. I hadn't heard a single word from my family since that night. My father had survived his heart attack, but the medical bills had drained whatever pitiful resources Diane had left. They were ghosts haunting a cheap apartment across town. Gemma was simply gone. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb outside the shop. It idled its tinted windows, reflecting the harsh midday sun. I didn't panic. My hands didn't shake. I continued clipping the stems of the hydrangeas, letting the excess leaves fall to the floor. The heavy glass door swung open. The bell chimed. Desmond Croft stepped inside. He wore a lightweight navy suit, immaculately pressed, despite the oppressive heat. He looked exactly the same as he had the day he sat in my father's drawing room. His pale blue eyes scanned the shop with detached clinical precision before landing on me behind the counter. He walked forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound against the linoleum. He stopped at the register. We looked at each other. In my past life, this proximity would have triggered a full physical collapse. I would have dropped to my knees. I would have hyperventilated until I passed out. But now, standing behind a scratched wooden counter with dirt under my fingernails and a steady paycheck in my pocket, I just saw a man. A cruel, empty man, but merely a man. "I need an arrangement," Desmond said smoothly, his resonant baritone filling the small shop. "Something suitable for a long-term care facility. Nothing too bright. White lilies, white orchids." He wasn't pretending he didn't know me. He was playing a different game. He wanted to see if the frightened mouse he had dismissed a year ago was still hiding inside me. He wanted to see if he still possessed the power to make me flinch. I didn't break eye contact. I reached under the counter and pulled out a tall glass vase. "White lilies carry a very strong scent, Mr. Croft. In an enclosed medical room, they can become quite suffocating." A slow, calculated smirk touched the corner of his mouth. He leaned slightly against the glass display case. "Suffocating. Yes, I suppose they can. But they look so pristine." "Orchids it is," I replied, turning my back to him to open the refrigeration unit. I selected 5 flawless white stems. I felt his gaze burning into my spine. He was waiting for my shoulders to tense. He was waiting for my hands to fumble. I kept my movements steady, slow, and entirely deliberate. I brought the flowers back to the counter and began arranging them, binding the stems with simple green florist wire. "You've changed, Chloe," Desmond observed. His tone was conversational, almost bored, but his eyes were sharp. "When I first met you, you couldn't even look at my shoes. Now you're standing here offering me unsolicited botanical advice." "I found a job," I said flatly. "I pay my own rent. Independence changes people." "Your sister is very ill," he said, shifting gears effortlessly. He was probing for a weak spot, a flicker of guilt, a tear, a tragic accident. She requires round-the-clock care. The doctors say she may never fully regain her mental faculties. The trauma was quite extensive. That is unfortunate, I answered. I wrapped a piece of thick brown paper around the base of the vase and taped it securely. That will be $85. Desmond stared at me. For the first time, a genuine flicker of confusion passed behind his dead, icy eyes. He was a predator who fed on fear and desperation. He had come here expecting me to scream at him, or cry, or beg for my sister's freedom. He had come for a meal. I was offering him a rock. He pulled a sleek leather wallet from his jacket and placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. "Keep the change." "Thank you for your business," I said, sliding the vase across the scratched wood. Desmond picked up the flowers. He looked at me one last time, searching for a crack in my armor. He found nothing. I was entirely out of his reach. He turned and walked out of the shop, the bell chiming a cheerful goodbye. I watched him cross the sidewalk and get into the back of his waiting car. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, merging into the heavy city traffic until it disappeared completely. I picked up the $100 bill, dropped it into the register, and went back to work. 2 weeks later, a small paragraph buried in the back pages of the Sunday paper announced that Mrs. Croft had been relocated to an exclusive, highly secure psychiatric facility in the Swiss Alps. There were no photos. There were no quotes from her husband. She was simply erased from the board. I folded the newspaper and tossed it into the recycling bin. I walked over to the window of my tiny apartment, pushed the glass up, and let the warm summer breeze blow through the room. Down below, the city was loud, chaotic, and beautifully alive. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, leaned against the windowsill, and finally exhaled. That marks the end of Chloe's journey, from a terrified victim to a woman entirely in control of her own destiny. She let her greedy sister take the bait, and the White Lotus paid the ultimate price for her vanity. If you enjoyed this dark, reborn revenge story, hit that like button to support the channel. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more satisfying tales of karma and survival. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next story.